You spend your days postponing the life you truly want to live, convinced that tomorrow will somehow be different from today. Every morning you wake up with grand intentions, yet by evening you've surrendered another day to mediocrity, watching others seize opportunities while you wait for the perfect moment that never comes. I am Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the most powerful empire in history while facing the constant reality that death could claim me at any moment. The Stoic wisdom I'll share will transform how you approach each day, showing you how to live with the urgency and purpose that comes from truly understanding life's fragility. The same philosophy that helped me govern millions while maintaining inner peace during plagues and wars can help you break free from procrastination and live with authentic intensity. But first, like this video, subscribe for more timeless wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to embrace life's urgency. When they placed the purple cloak upon my shoulders and declared me Emperor of Rome, I felt the weight of every life in the empire settling onto my chest. The fabric was heavier than any armor I had ever worn, not because of its material, but because of what it represented: the power of life and death over millions of souls. I was 39 years old when Antoninus Pius died and left me this burden. In that moment, standing before the Senate with the purple draped across my back, I understood that my own mortality had become intertwined with the fate of civilization itself. Every decision I made could send thousands to their deaths or save thousands of lives. Every moment of hesitation could cost the empire dearly. The philosophers had taught me about death, in the abstract: how to contemplate it, how to accept it, how to live wisely in its shadow. But the purple cloak taught me something different. It taught me that death wasn't just my personal companion. It was the ultimate advisor to every emperor who had ever ruled. When you hold the power to command legions, to declare war, to execute, or pardon, you realize that mortality isn't just a philosophical concept, it's the most practical reality you face. I remember the first execution order I had to sign. A provincial governor had betrayed his trust, stolen from the people, caused suffering that rippled through entire communities. The parchment sat on my desk for 3 days while I wrestled with the decision. This man would die because of marks I made with ink. His wife would become a widow. His children would grow up fatherless. Yet justice demanded his life, and mercy toward him would be cruelty toward his victims. As I finally pressed my seal into the wax, I felt something shift inside me. The weight of that decision, the absolute finality of it, awakened me to the preciousness of every choice, every moment, every breath. If I could end a life with such permanence, how much more should I treasure the life I had been given? How much more urgently should I live each day, knowing that my time to make a difference was limited? The purple cloak became my daily reminder that time was not infinite. Each morning when I donned it, I felt the pressure of mortality, not just my own, but that of everyone depending on my leadership. This wasn't the leisurely contemplation of death that philosophers enjoyed in their gardens. This was the sharp, immediate awareness that comes when you realize your decisions echo through history. That realization changed everything about how I approached each day. The year the plague came to Rome, I learned what it truly meant to live in the shadow of death. Not the abstract death that philosophers discuss in marble halls, but the immediate, pressing reality of mortality that stalks through streets and enters homes without invitation. I was in my private study when the first reports arrived from Alexandria. Ships were arriving with cargo, but no living crew. Entire neighborhoods were falling silent. The pestilence was moving north along our trade routes, like an army that could not be stopped or negotiated with. Within months, it reached Rome itself, and I watched the greatest city in the world transform into something I barely recognized. Every morning, I would wake to updated death counts. Hundreds, then thousands, then so many that we stopped counting. Individual lives and started measuring loss in districts cleared, in professions decimated, in families erased from existence. The purple cloak that had once felt heavy with responsibility now felt almost weightless compared to the crushing awareness that death was moving freely through my empire, claiming subjects I had sworn to protect. It was during those plague years that I began my most honest writing. In the evenings, after long days of managing relief efforts and trying to maintain order in a crumbling world, I would sit with my journal and confront the reality that had become impossible to ignore. Death was not a distant philosophical concept, was the air we breathed, the companion that walked beside every citizen, the uninvited guest at every meal. My private meditations during those years became exercises in radical honesty. I wrote to myself about the fragility of everything I had built, everything I cherished, everything I thought was permanent. You came from nothing, I reminded myself on the page, and to nothing you will return. The empire, your family, your accomplishments, all of it is temporary. The plague proves what the philosophers only theorized. But here's what I discovered in those dark writings. Acknowledging the temporary nature of everything didn't diminish its value, it intensified it. When I fully accepted that my time with my wife Faustina was limited, every conversation became more precious. When I understood that my children might not survive to adulthood, every moment with them burned brighter. When I realized that the empire itself was mortal, every decision to improve it became more urgent. The plague taught me to write as if I might not live to see morning. Those private journal entries, written by candlelight while death stalked the streets outside, became the foundation of everything I would later understand about living urgently. I learned to pour my deepest thoughts onto parchment because tomorrow was no longer guaranteed. During the worst months, when the death carts rolled through Rome collecting bodies, I developed what I called my evening practice. Before sleep, I would write one meditation on impermanence and one on what made the day meaningful despite its horrors. This wasn't morbid dwelling. It was the most life-affirming practice I had ever discovered. The plague years stripped away every illusion about permanence and security. In their place, they left something far more valuable: the absolute clarity that comes from living fully aware of life's fragility. The Germanic frontier taught me lessons about mortality that no philosophy, text could convey. When you sleep in a tent 50 yards from where enemy warriors probe your defenses, when you wake each morning uncertain whether this day will be your last, when you step over the bodies of men who laughed with you around the fire just hours before, that's when mortality becomes your most intimate teacher. I had been emperor for nearly a decade when the Germanic tribes began their coordinated assault on our northern borders. The Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Sarmatians, warrior peoples who understood something about living urgently that our comfortable Roman citizens had forgotten. They lived each day as if it might be their last, because, on the frontier, it very well might be, leading the legions north to the Danube. I carried my philosophical writings with me, tucked into my campaign chest alongside maps and military dispatches. But philosophy, written in peaceful study rooms, takes on entirely different meanings when read by torchlight in a command tent while enemy war drums echo across the darkness. I remember the morning after our first major engagement. The field was littered with Roman and Germanic dead, their bodies twisted together in the eternal democracy of death. I walked among them as the sun rose, studying their faces. Here was a boy from Gaul who would never see his mother again. There was a warrior whose children would wait in vain for their father's return. Death had made them equals in a way that life never could. That morning, I wrote in my journal, "Death levels all distinctions. The emperor and the slave, the philosopher and the warrior, the Roman and the barbarian, all are equal before the final democracy." But more importantly, I realized that this equality should inform how we live, not just how we die. My battle-worn armor became a meditation tool. Each dent represented a moment when death had reached for me and missed. Each scratch was a reminder that the difference between the living and the dead was often nothing more than inches or seconds. When you felt an enemy's spear whistle past your ear close enough to part your hair, when you've seen your bodyguard fall defending your life, you understand that survival is not a guaranteed, a daily gift. The campaigns dragged on for years. Winters in barely heated barracks, summers marching through hostile territory, endless cycles of battle, negotiation, and preparation for the next engagement. Through it all, I maintained my evening practice of writing, but the words were different. Now, they carried the weight of battlefield experience, the clarity that comes from living constantly aware that this might be your final sunset. I wrote philosophy between cavalry charges and strategic planning sessions. My meditations on death were composed while actual death stalked through our camp. The abstractions of academic philosophy became lived truths tested in the crucible of warfare. What I learned on those Germanic campaigns was this: the proximity of death doesn't diminish life, it concentrates it. Every meal tastes more vivid when it might be your last. Every letter home carries more love. When you're uncertain, you'll write another. Every decision becomes more important when time is scarce, and consequences are immediate. The frontier stripped away the luxury of postponement and the illusion of infinite time. In their place, it gave me the warrior's gift, the ability to live each moment with complete presence and urgency. When you truly understand that your time is limited, everything you desire comes into sharp focus. The plague and the battlefield had taught me about mortality, but it was in the quiet moments between crises that I learned the most practical lesson of urgent living. Not everything that calls for your attention deserves it. I developed what I called the deathbed test during my campaigns. Before pursuing any desire, before committing time to any pursuit, I would ask myself, if I were dying tomorrow, would this matter? Would I regret spending precious hours on this, or would I be grateful for the time invested? This simple question transformed how I approached everything from imperial business to personal relationships. The Roman court was a carnival of endless wants. Senators desired higher positions. Merchants wanted exclusive contracts. Generals sought greater commands. Citizens demanded more entertainment and subsidies. Everyone wanted something, and as emperor, I was the focal point of all these desires. But proximity to death had taught me to distinguish between genuine needs and manufactured wants. I remember a particular morning when 3 different groups sought audiences with me. The first was a delegation of wealthy Romans requesting tax exemptions for a new luxury theater. The second was a group of frontier commanders needing reinforcements to protect settlements from raids. The third was my wife, asking if I could join her for our daughter's music lesson that afternoon. Before my understanding of mortality's urgency, I might have given equal consideration to all 3 requests, but the deathbed test clarified everything. Instantly, the theater was a pleasant luxury that would entertain people who were already comfortable. The reinforcements would save lives of families living in constant danger. Time with my daughter would create memories that would comfort her. Long after I was gone, the choice was obvious. I allocated resources to the frontier, declined the theater meeting, and spent the afternoon listening to my daughter play her lyre. That evening, I wrote in my journal, "Desire everything, and you possess nothing. Desire what truly matters, and you possess everything that counts." This wasn't about becoming austere or rejecting all pleasures. The Stoic discipline of desire isn't about wanting nothing. It's about wanting the right things with the appropriate intensity. When you're aware that your time is finite, you naturally become more selective about how you spend it. I developed daily practices for examining my desires. Each morning, I would review my plans for the day and ask, what am I pursuing today that I wouldn't pursue if I knew this was my final week? This practice revealed how much energy I had been wasting on activities that felt important but weren't actually meaningful. The discipline of desire, when informed by mortality's urgency, becomes a form of liberation. Instead of being pulled in countless directions by every want that arises, you develop the clarity to focus on what genuinely deserves your limited time and energy. I learned to want fewer things, but to want them more deeply. I desired more time with my family, more opportunities to serve the empire well, more moments of genuine connection with the people around me. These desires, tested against the reality of death, proved worthy of an emperor's attention. The result was a strange paradox. By wanting less, I experienced more. By disciplining my desires according to life's brevity, I found a richness that all the imperial treasures couldn't provide. There's a practice I developed during the darkest nights on the Germanic frontier that changed how I understood both my mortality and my purpose. When the weight of leadership felt crushing, when the daily decisions seemed impossible, when the proximity of death made everything feel fragile and temporary, I would step outside my tent and look up at the stars. The Roman astronomers had taught me to see patterns in the night sky, to understand our place in the cosmic order. But it wasn't until I combined this knowledge with my growing awareness of life's brevity that I discovered what I called the view from above, a perspective that simultaneously humbled and empowered me. Standing beneath those ancient lights, I would imagine ascending higher and higher above the battlefield, first above my tent, where I could see our campfires and the enemy's fires twinkling like earthbound stars, then higher until the entire frontier became visible, two armies reduced to specks of light in an ocean of darkness, higher still until I could see the whole empire, then the entire continent, then the earth itself suspended in the vast emptiness. From that cosmic perspective, every problem that had seemed overwhelming just hours before revealed its true proportions. The political maneuvering in Rome, the petty rivalries between generals, the endless administrative details that filled my days, all of it shrank to appropriate size when viewed from the perspective of eternity. But here's what surprised me. This cosmic view didn't diminish the importance of my actions, it clarified what truly mattered. When I imagined looking down at my life from the stars, certain activities blazed with significance while others faded into irrelevance. Time spent in genuine service to others glowed brightly. Moments of authentic connection with my family burned like beacons. Decisions made from wisdom rather than ego stood out like monuments. I began incorporating this practice into my daily routine. During particularly challenging imperial business, I would pause and ask myself, how will this look from the view above? In the context of cosmic time and space, what is the right action here? This wasn't escapism, was the most practical tool I ever developed for decision-making. The view from above taught me that urgency and perspective aren't contradictory, they're complementary. Understanding the vastness of the universe and the brevity of human life creates a unique kind of clarity. You realize that while your individual existence is cosmically brief, it's also unrepeatable and therefore precious beyond measure. I would imagine future astronomers, centuries after my death, looking up at the same stars I was watching. What legacy would my brief time among those stars leave? What changes would ripple through the cosmic future because of how I chose to live my finite days? This perspective transformed every decision from a local concern into a cosmic responsibility. The practice also revealed something profound about death itself. From the stellar perspective, death wasn't an ending, it was a return. We are made of star stuff, temporarily organized into consciousness, destined to return to the cosmic dance. This understanding didn't eliminate the urgency of mortality. It placed that urgency within a framework of meaning that made every moment both humbling and magnificent. When I returned to my tent after these cosmic meditations, I carried a different quality of attention. Problems remained problems, but they were properly sized. Opportunities remained opportunities, but they were illuminated by the knowledge that this moment, this choice, this day would never come again in the entire history of the universe. Roman engineers who designed our frontier fortifications understood a principle that applies equally to the human soul. The strongest defense is built in layers, with the most crucial elements protected at the center. Watching them construct these impregnable strongholds taught me how to build something even more important, an inner fortress that could withstand any assault, including the ultimate siege of mortality itself. The outer walls of a Roman fort are impressive, but they're meant to be expendable. Enemy forces can damage them, even breach them, without compromising the fort's essential function. Inside these outer defenses lie secondary walls, supply depots, barracks, and administrative buildings. But at the very center sits the principal headquarters, where the most vital decisions are made and the most precious resources are protected. I realized that the human soul requires the same architectural approach. Your outer walls might include your reputation, your wealth, your physical health, your social position. These matter, and you should maintain them well, but you must never confuse them with your essential self. They can be damaged or destroyed without touching what's truly important. Your inner walls might include your relationships, your work, your daily practices, your immediate goals. These are more crucial than the outer defenses, closer to who you really are, but still not the center of your being. Even these can be threatened without destroying your core. But at the center of your inner citadel lies something that no external force can touch: your capacity to choose your response to whatever happens. This is what I learned to call the inner citadel, the space where your will resides, where your character is forged, where your essential self makes its most important decisions. The plague could destroy my outer walls. It killed thousands of my subjects, damaged the empire's economy, threatened my family's health. The Germanic campaigns could breach my inner walls. They separated me from my loved ones, filled my days with violence, forced me to make decisions that haunted my sleep. But neither plague nor war could touch my inner citadel unless I allowed them entry. I developed specific practices for strengthening this inner fortress. Each morning, I would remind myself, today, external events will try to disturb my peace. People will disappoint me, plans will fail, unexpected problems will arise. But my capacity to respond with wisdom, courage, and integrity remains inviolate. That citadel is mine to defend. The key insight was understanding that mortality itself couldn't breach the inner citadel. Death could take my body, my relationships, my empire, my legacy, all the outer and inner walls of my fortress. But it couldn't touch the choices I made. While alive, the character I developed, the love I expressed, the wisdom I cultivated, these resided in a space beyond death's reach. This wasn't denial or wishful thinking. I felt fear, grief, and uncertainty as acutely as anyone. But I learned to experience these emotions in the outer courtyards of my soul while keeping the central command center clear and functional. I could acknowledge that death would eventually claim everything external, while simultaneously maintaining an unshakable core that gave meaning to every day I had remaining. The inner citadel becomes most valuable when you're living with urgency. When you know your time is limited, you need a place of stability and clarity from which to make crucial decisions. This inner fortress provides exactly that: a space where you can evaluate what truly matters, where you can respond rather than react, where you can maintain your essential self regardless of external circumstances. Building this inner citadel isn't done once and forgotten. It requires daily maintenance, constant vigilance, regular reinforcement. But once constructed, it provides the foundation for living both urgently and peacefully, knowing that while everything external is temporary, something essential within you touches the eternal. The single most liberating discovery of my reign came from a simple exercise I performed every morning, separating everything in my life into two categories. In the first category, when everything within my control. In the second, when everything outside my control. This practice, which I called the dichotomy of control, transformed both how I ruled the empire and how I faced my own mortality. When you're emperor, the illusion of control is overwhelming. Citizens look to you to control the weather for their crops, to control distant enemies threatening the borders, to control diseases spreading through the cities, to control the loyalty of generals you've never met. The weight of these expectations can crush a man's spirit if he doesn't understand what he can and cannot actually influence. I learned to begin each day by making my lists. In the within my control category, my decisions, my responses to events, my character, my effort, my attention, my values, my immediate actions. In the outside my control category, other people's choices, natural disasters, enemy actions, past events, future outcomes, my reputation, my lifespan, the eventual fate of the empire. The results were immediately transformative. Instead of exhausting myself trying to control the uncontrollable, I could pour all my energy into the areas where my influence actually mattered. Instead of worrying about whether future historians would judge me favorably, I focused on making decisions worthy of respect. Instead of trying to force senators to agree with me, I concentrated on presenting my positions with clarity and integrity. This practice became especially powerful when applied to mortality itself. I couldn't control when death would come, what form it would take, or how much time remained to me. These uncertainties could paralyze an emperor if he allowed them to dominate his thinking. But I could control how I prepared for death, how I lived each remaining day, how I treated the people around me, and what legacy I built through my daily choices. The dichotomy of control didn't eliminate the urgency. I felt about time's passage. It focused that urgency like sunlight through a lens. Instead of frantically trying to extend my life or secure my reputation, I channeled my energy into areas where action could make a real difference. I couldn't control whether the plague would spare my family, but I could control how much love and attention I gave them each day. I couldn't control whether my philosophical writings would survive, but I could control the care and honesty I put into each word. What surprised me was how this practice actually increased my effectiveness. As a leader, when you stop wasting energy on the uncontrollable, you have tremendous resources available for the areas where you can make an impact. When senators saw that I wasn't trying to manipulate their opinions, but was instead focused on governing well, they became more receptive to my actual proposals. When generals realized I wasn't micromanaging their tactics, but was ensuring they had proper resources and clear objectives, they performed better. The dichotomy of control also provided a strange kind of peace in the face of mortality. I couldn't control death's timing, but I could control my preparation for it. I couldn't control what would happen to the empire after my death, but I could control how well I trained my successor and what systems I left in place. I couldn't control whether future generations would remember me, but I could control whether my daily actions were worthy of memory. This wasn't passive acceptance, it was the most active approach to life I ever discovered. By releasing my grip on the uncontrollable, I could grasp more firmly the things that actually responded to my influence. The result was a life of focused intensity, where every ounce of energy went toward areas where it could genuinely matter. The most profound realization of my life came not during a great battle or in the halls of power, but during a quiet moment in my tent when I suddenly understood that I had never actually lived in any time except the present moment. All my memories were experienced now. All my plans for the future were made now. All my fears about death were felt now. The present moment wasn't just where life happened, it was the only place life could happen. This understanding revolutionized how I approached mortality. Instead of dreading a future death or regretting past mistakes, I learned to pour my complete attention into the only time I could actually influence, this moment, right now. The awareness of life's brevity didn't pull me into anxiety about the future. It anchored me more deeply in the present. I developed what I called presence practice. During my military campaigns, between the urgent demands of leadership, I would take moments to fully inhabit wherever I was. If I was reviewing battle plans, I would feel the weight of the parchment in my hands, notice the flicker of candlelight on the maps, hear the distant sounds of soldiers preparing for tomorrow's march. If I was eating, I would taste every bite, as if it were my last meal. If I was writing, I would feel the stylus moving across the wax tablet, watch each letter form under my hand. This wasn't distraction from important duties. It was the foundation that made those duties meaningful. When you're fully present to what you're doing, every action becomes a form of worship. Every decision carries more weight. Every interaction becomes more authentic. The urgency that comes from understanding mortality doesn't scatter your attention. It concentrates it. I noticed that living in the present moment transformed my relationships completely. When I was talking with my wife, instead of simultaneously planning tomorrow's schedule or reviewing the morning's correspondence, I would give her my complete attention. I would see the way sunlight caught her hair, hear the precise tone of her voice, notice the expressions that crossed her face. These moments of complete presence became more precious than any imperial treasure. The same principle applied to governing. When meeting with advisors, instead of rushing through agenda items to get to the next appointment, I would listen with complete attention to what they were actually saying. I would notice their body language, hear the concerns beneath their words, feel the weight of the decisions we were making together. This quality of presence made me a more effective leader and made each interaction more meaningful. But the deepest discovery was how present moment awareness changed my relationship with death itself. When you're truly present, death becomes not a future threat, but a current teacher. The knowledge that this moment is unrepeatable, that this conversation will never happen again, that this sunset is unique in the history of the universe. Awareness brings an intensity and appreciation that transforms ordinary moments into something sacred. I learned to see each day as a complete lifetime. Morning became birth, full of potential and energy. Midday became maturity, when important work was accomplished. Evening became old age, a time for reflection and wisdom. Night became death, a peaceful release into rest. By experiencing each day as a complete cycle of life and death, I learned to live each day fully while preparing myself for the ultimate transition. The present moment, I discovered, is where mortality and eternity meet. In the now, you experience both the poignancy of impermanence and the timeless quality of awareness itself. Living with complete presence doesn't eliminate the urgency that comes from understanding life's brevity. It fulfills that urgency by ensuring that nothing is wasted, nothing is missed, nothing is taken for granted. When you truly understand that death will strip away everything external, your wealth, your position, your reputation, your possessions, even your body, you're forced to confront a fundamental question: what, if anything, survives? Through years of ruling, fighting, and facing mortality daily, I discovered that only one thing remains untouchable by death's reach: the character you develop and the virtues you practice while alive. This realization changed everything about how I valued my time and energy. The Roman world measured success by conquest, accumulation, and power. But when I applied the ultimate test, what would matter on my deathbed. These external measures revealed their limitations. The territory I conquered would eventually be lost. The wealth I accumulated would pass to others. The power I wielded would transfer to my successor. But the integrity I maintained, the justice I practiced, the courage I demonstrated, and the wisdom I cultivated, these became part of who I was in a way that death couldn't diminish. I began to restructure my entire approach to living around this insight. Instead of asking what will bring me success, I started asking what will build my character. Instead of how can I gain more, I asked how can I become better. This wasn't moral posturing, it was the most practical response to mortality I could discover. The four cardinal virtues, wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, became my daily compass. Each morning, I would examine my planned activities through this lens. Would today's decisions increase my wisdom or merely add to my information? Would my actions serve justice or just my own interests? Would I act with courage or take the easy path? Would I practice temperance or indulge in excess? What I discovered was that virtue-based living created a strange immunity to death's sting. When your primary investment is in character rather than external goods, death becomes less threatening. You can lose your empire, but you can't lose the wisdom you gained while governing it. You can lose your health, but you can't lose the courage you developed while facing illness. You can lose your relationships, but you can't lose the love you expressed while you had them. This understanding transformed how I handled imperial crises. During the plague years, when external solutions seemed inadequate, I focused on responding. With virtue, I couldn't cure the disease, but I could demonstrate courage in the face of catastrophe. I couldn't prevent all deaths, but I could ensure that relief efforts were organized justly. I couldn't eliminate suffering, but I could respond with wisdom and compassion. The Germanic campaigns provided constant opportunities to practice virtue under pressure. When facing military setbacks, I could choose courage over despair. When negotiating with enemy leaders, I could choose justice over mere advantage. When soldiers looked to me for leadership, I could choose wisdom over expedience. Each choice built something that would survive the campaigns themselves. I learned that virtue isn't about perfection, it's about direction. Every situation offers opportunities to move toward wisdom or away from it, toward justice or away from it, toward courage or away from it. The key is developing the habit of choosing the virtuous direction, especially when it's difficult or costly. Living with virtue as your primary goal creates a profound sense of security in the face of mortality. When you know that your deepest investments are in things that death cannot touch, you can face life's uncertainties with equanimity. You can take risks for worthy causes because your essential self is safely invested in character rather than outcomes. This became my answer to the urgency of mortality. Pour your limited time into unlimited values. Build character that transcends time. Practice virtues that outlast their practice. Create meaning that survives your mortality. There came a morning during my final campaign when I woke with the absolute certainty that I was practicing for my death, not in some distant theoretical way, but immediately and practically. Every decision I made, every conversation I had, every moment of attention I gave was preparation for the ultimate departure that awaited me. This wasn't morbid preoccupation, it was the most life-affirming realization I ever experienced. When you understand that dying well requires specific preparation, just like governing well or fighting well, you begin to approach death as a skill to be developed rather than a catastrophe to be avoided. I had witnessed many deaths during my reign. Some people died badly, clinging desperately to life, filled with regret, terrified of the unknown. Others died well, peacefully, with dignity, surrounded by love, at peace with their choices. The difference wasn't in their circumstances, but in their preparation. Those who died well had spent their living years learning how to let go. I began what I called my daily dying practice. Each evening, I would imagine that this night might be my last, not with anxiety or dread, but with the practical question, if I died tonight, would I be satisfied with how I had lived this day? This exercise revealed with startling clarity which activities were truly worthwhile and which were mere distractions. The daily dying practice taught me to complete each day fully. I learned to express love clearly to the people who mattered to me. I made sure that important decisions weren't left hanging. I cleared my conscience of any wrongs that needed addressing. I spent time in activities that felt meaningful rather than just urgent. By the end of each day, I aimed to have nothing left undone that truly mattered. This practice also transformed how I approached sleep itself. Instead of collapsing into unconsciousness at the end of exhausting days, I began treating sleep as a rehearsal for death. I would lie down peacefully, release my grip on the day's concerns, and surrender consciousness with gratitude rather than resistance. Each night became practice in letting go, but the deepest preparation for dying well involved learning to hold everything lightly. The empire, my family, my accomplishments, my plans. I learned to love them fully while simultaneously being prepared to release them. This wasn't detachment or indifference. It was a deeper form of love that didn't depend on permanent possession. I spent considerable time contemplating what would happen to the empire after my death. Rather than clinging to control from beyond the grave, I focused on preparing systems and people that could function without me. I trained my successor, established clear protocols, and built institutions that would outlast my personal involvement. This was practical preparation for dying well, ensuring that my departure wouldn't create chaos for those who remained. The art of dying well also required making peace with my limitations and failures. I couldn't govern perfectly, fight every battle successfully, or solve every problem facing the empire. But I could ensure that my efforts were genuine, my intentions were honorable, and my legacy was one of sincere service. Learning to die well meant learning to be satisfied with having done my best rather than having done everything. Perhaps most importantly, preparing for death taught me to see each day as a gift rather than a given. When you're practicing dying, well, every morning becomes a resurrection, every sunset becomes a completion. Every moment of consciousness becomes precious beyond measure. The art of dying well transforms every aspect of living into something more intentional, more grateful, more present. Death preparation wasn't about becoming comfortable with non-existence. It was about becoming so comfortable with the life I was living that I could release it without regret when the time came. The awareness that everyone you love will eventually die, and that you will eventually lose them, could paralyze the heart if you let it. But I discovered something remarkable during my years of living with mortality's constant presence. The knowledge of love's impermanence doesn't diminish its power. It intensifies it beyond anything you can imagine when you take relationships for granted. My wife Faustina and I had been married for over 20 years when the plague reached Rome. Watching death claim so many couples around us, seeing families torn apart without warning, observing how quickly the familiar could become memory of this transformed how I approached each conversation with her, each shared meal, each quiet evening together. I began what I called loving as if losing, not with desperate clinging or anxious attachment, but with the profound appreciation that comes from understanding how rare and precious each moment of connection really is. When Faustina would share her thoughts about the day's events, I would listen not just with my mind, but with the awareness that someday I would give anything to hear her voice again. When she laughed at something our children had done, I would memorize the sound, knowing that laughter was creating itself in an unrepeatable moment. This awareness changed everything about how I expressed love. I stopped assuming there would always be time later to say important things. If I felt gratitude for something Faustina had done, I expressed it immediately. If I wanted to tell her how much she meant to me, I didn't wait for a special occasion. If I disagreed with her about something, I made sure we resolved it before sleep rather than carrying resentment into an uncertain tomorrow with my children. The awareness of mortality created an urgency about passing on what truly mattered. I couldn't guarantee I would live to see them reach adulthood, so I made sure that important conversations happened sooner rather than later. I shared the principles I hoped would guide them, the love I wanted them to carry forward, the wisdom I had gained through my own struggles and mistakes. But I also learned something equally important: how to love without clinging. The deepest love doesn't try to possess or control. It appreciates and releases. When you truly understand that everyone you love is on loan from the universe for an unknown period of time, you learn to hold them with open hands rather than grasping fists. This approach transformed my friendships as well. Knowing that my time with advisors, generals, and companions was limited made every interaction more intentional. I stopped taking loyal service for granted. I expressed appreciation more readily. I forgave disagreements more quickly. When you understand that this conversation might be your last with someone, you don't waste it on petty grievances or superficial pleasantries. The shadow of death also taught me to see the love that surrounded me more clearly. The devotion of my bodyguards, who risked their lives daily for mine. The loyalty of soldiers who followed my commands into dangerous situations. The service of administrators who worked tirelessly to keep the empire functioning. All of this became visible as forms of love when viewed through the lens of mortality. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that love itself is the one force that seems to transcend death's power. The love I had experienced and expressed would continue to influence the world long after my body returned to dust. The love my parents had given me shaped how I loved my own children. The love I showed my family would influence how they loved others. Love creates ripples that extend far beyond the lifespan of any individual heart. Living in the shadow of death taught me that the appropriate response to love's impermanence isn't despair, it's gratitude and intensity. Every relationship becomes more precious when you understand its temporary nature, and every expression of love becomes more urgent when you realize how little time you have to share it. The most profound shift in my approach to work came when I fully accepted that I was building an empire with hands that would eventually turn to dust. This realization didn't discourage me from working, it transformed how and why I worked, creating an urgency and intentionality that made every project more meaningful than I'd ever imagined possible. Before I understood mortality's implications, I approached imperial work with the unconscious assumption that I had unlimited time to perfect every decision, unlimited opportunities to correct mistakes, unlimited chances to achieve my vision for Rome. This assumption bred procrastination, perfectionism, and a tendency to postpone the most important projects while getting lost in minor details. The plague years shattered these comfortable illusions. Watching competent administrators die overnight, seeing crucial projects abandoned when their leaders succumbed to disease, observing how quickly institutional knowledge could vanish, all of this taught me that meaningful work requires the assumption that time is scarce and opportunities are finite. I developed what I called legacy thinking for every significant project. Before beginning any major initiative, I would ask myself, if I died tomorrow, would this work be worth the time I invested in it? Would it serve people in ways that justify the finite hours I spent creating it? Would I be proud to have this project represent how I used my limited time on Earth? This practice immediately clarified my priorities. Administrative busy work that generated activity without impact fell away. Political maneuvering that served ego rather than empire became obviously wasteful. Projects that might impress contemporaries but wouldn't serve future generations lost their appeal. In their place, I focused on work that would create lasting value, legal reforms that would protect citizens for generations, infrastructure that would serve the empire long after my death, institutions that would function effectively without my personal involvement. The awareness of mortality also changed how I approached delegation and mentorship. Since I couldn't accomplish everything personally, and since my time for direct influence was limited, I became intensely focused on developing other people's capabilities. Teaching a competent administrator to think strategically wasn't just efficient management, it was a way of multiplying my impact beyond the boundaries of my own lifespan. I began treating every major decision as if it might be my last opportunity to influence that area of imperial life. This didn't make me reckless, but it did make me decisive. Instead of endlessly debating policy options, I would gather the best information available, consult with trusted advisors, and then commit fully to a course of action. The knowledge that delay might mean the opportunity would pass to someone else created a healthy impatience with perfectionism. Working with mortality awareness also transformed my relationship with failure. When you understand that your time is limited, failure becomes a teacher rather than a tragedy. Each mistake became valuable data about what didn't work, information that could improve future decisions. Since I couldn't afford to repeat failed approaches, I became more willing to acknowledge errors quickly and adjust strategies accordingly. The most important discovery was that meaningful work becomes a form of practical immortality. While my body would eventually fail, the laws I helped create would continue protecting people. The roads I ordered built would continue connecting communities. The institutions I strengthened would continue serving the common good. The people I mentored would continue applying principles I had shared with them. This understanding created a strange paradox. By fully accepting my mortality, I was able to build things that would outlast my death. The urgency that came from knowing my time was limited didn't make me short-sighted. It made me focus on creating lasting value rather than temporary achievement. Work approached with mortality awareness becomes a form of worship, a way of honoring the gift of consciousness by using it to serve something greater than personal survival. The Germanic tribes taught me a lesson I never expected to learn from enemies. Sometimes the things that seem designed to destroy you are actually the very forces that can create your greatest strength. When viewed through the lens of mortality, every obstacle transforms from a problem to be avoided into an opportunity for growth that might not come again. I had been fighting the northern campaigns for 3 years when I realized that my greatest adversity was becoming my greatest teacher. The harsh winters, the constant threat of attack, the separation from family, the pressure of military leadership, of these challenges that I initially saw as obstacles to my peace and happiness, were actually forging capabilities I never would have developed in comfort. The freezing nights when sleep was impossible taught me mental resilience. The moments when enemy forces seemed overwhelming taught me courage under pressure. The decisions that had to be made with incomplete information taught me wisdom in uncertainty. The responsibility for thousands of soldiers' lives taught me leadership that no classroom could provide. Every obstacle was simultaneously a problem and a curriculum. This realization revolutionized how I approached difficulties throughout the rest of my reign. Instead of asking how can I avoid this challenge, I began asking what is this obstacle trying to teach me? How can I use this difficulty to develop capabilities I'll need later? What would I miss if I found an easy way around this problem? The plague provided the ultimate test of this philosophy. Here was an obstacle that couldn't be fought with armies, negotiated with through diplomacy, or solved through administrative efficiency. Death was stalking through my empire, claiming subjects I had sworn to protect, threatening my own family, exposing the limits of imperial power in the most brutal way possible. I could have spent those years in despair, overwhelmed by my inability to control the uncontrollable. Instead, I chose to see the plague as a masterclass in mortality, leadership under pressure, and the development of character in impossible circumstances. The plague taught me compassion for suffering I had never experienced. It taught me humility about the limits of human power. It taught me the preciousness of every ordinary day when death wasn't stalking the streets. The key insight was understanding that obstacles become pathways when you approach them with the right mindset. The Germanic campaigns weren't preventing me from living a meaningful life. They were providing opportunities for meaning that peaceful times couldn't offer. The plague wasn't destroying my chance for happiness. It was teaching me what happiness really meant and where it could actually be found. This perspective requires a fundamental shift in how you view time and opportunity. When you understand that your life is limited, you realize that obstacles aren't interruptions to your real life. They are your real life. The challenges you face aren't preventing you from becoming who you're meant to be. They are the very forces that can create who you're meant to become. I learned to embrace what the Stoics call the discipline of ascent, choosing how to interpret events rather than letting events dictate your internal experience. Every setback could be viewed as either a catastrophe or a chance to practice resilience. Every criticism could be seen as either an attack or an opportunity to examine your character. Every failure could be interpreted as either proof of inadequacy or data for improvement. The most powerful application of this principle came when I faced my own mortality directly. Death itself, the ultimate obstacle, could be viewed as either the end of all possibilities or the force that gives urgency and meaning to every choice while you're alive. By choosing to see death as the teacher rather than the enemy, I transformed my relationship with mortality from fear to appreciation. Living with this understanding means that nothing is wasted. Every experience becomes raw material for growth. Every challenge becomes a chance to develop strength. Every obstacle becomes a pathway to capabilities you didn't know you needed. The morning I truly understood that everything I possessed was temporary was the morning I became genuinely wealthy. For the first time in my life, not because I had gained anything new, but because I finally saw clearly what had been mine all along and learned to appreciate it with the intensity that comes from knowing it won't last forever. This transformation began during a particularly difficult period of the Germanic campaigns. I had been away from Rome for months, sleeping in a military tent, eating field rations, surrounded by the constant stress of warfare. Everything that normally defined my comfort and status as emperor was stripped away. Yet one evening, as I sat by the campfire writing in my journal, I experienced a moment of profound gratitude that surpassed any satisfaction I had ever felt in the imperial palace. What triggered this revelation was the simple taste of hot soup after a cold day, the warmth spreading through my chest, the steam rising from the bowl. The simple fact that I was alive to experience this basic pleasure, all of it, suddenly seemed like an incredible gift rather than a mere necessity. I realized that I had eaten thousands of meals in the palace without truly tasting any of them because I had assumed they would always be available. That night, I began what became my most transformative daily practice: gratitude in the face of impermanence. Each evening, I would identify specific experiences from that day and appreciate them with the full knowledge that they were unrepeatable. The way morning light had fallen across my tent, the sound of my horse's hooves on the frozen ground, a letter from my wife, a successful negotiation with enemy leaders, the fact that I had lived through another day when so many had not. But here's what I discovered. Gratitude isn't diminished by impermanence, it's intensified by it. When you know that this sunset is unique in the history of the universe, that this conversation with a friend will never happen again in exactly this way, that this moment of health and consciousness is a temporary gift, everything becomes more vivid, more precious, more worthy of appreciation. I learned to distinguish between two types of gratitude. The first is gratitude for what you hope will continue: your health, your relationships, your circumstances. This gratitude is pleasant but fragile, constantly threatened by the possibility of loss. The second is gratitude for what you know is temporary: this particular moment, this specific experience, this unrepeatable configuration of circumstances. This gratitude is unshakable because it doesn't depend on permanence. The practice of grateful impermanence transformed even my most challenging experiences. During the plague years, when death surrounded us daily, I learned to be grateful for each morning when my family was still alive, for each evening when we could still share a meal together, for each conversation that death had not yet interrupted. This wasn't denial of the tragedy, that was a way of honoring what remained while we still had it. I began seeing my entire life as a series of temporary gifts. My position as emperor was on loan for an unknown period. My relationships were temporary arrangements that could be severed at any moment. My health was a daily gift that could be withdrawn without notice. My consciousness itself was a brief flame that would eventually be extinguished. Instead of making these realities depressing, gratitude made them magnificent. The most profound shift came when I applied this practice to ordinary moments. The feel of water when I washed my hands became worthy of appreciation when I remembered that someday I would no longer have hands to wash. The sound of rain on my tent became beautiful when I considered that someday I would no longer have ears to hear. The simple act of breathing became miraculous when I contemplated that each breath was one of a finite number I would take. This practice created what I called poverty consciousness, not material poverty, but the understanding that we are all temporarily poor in time, permanently poor in guarantees, constantly poor in certainty about the future. This poverty consciousness made every gift more valuable, every experience more intense, every moment more worthy of complete attention. Gratitude in the face of impermanence became my antidote to the anxiety that mortality awareness can create. Instead of focusing on what I would eventually lose, I learned to focus on what I was privileged to experience while I had the chance. There came a day during my final illness when I realized that everything I had traditionally thought of as my legacy, the territories conquered, the buildings constructed, the wealth accumulated, would eventually crumble to dust. But something else would survive, something far more durable than marble monuments or military victories: the changes I had helped create in other people's lives and the principles I had lived by that might inspire future generations. This understanding transformed how I thought about contribution and legacy. Instead of asking what will people remember about me, I began asking what will continue to serve others long after I'm gone. What seeds am I planting that will grow into forests I'll never see? How can I use my limited time to create unlimited value? The shift began when I observed how my own character had been shaped by people who died long before I was born. The Stoic philosophers whose writings guided my decisions had been dead for centuries, yet their influence on my daily choices was immediate and practical. The legendary leaders whose examples inspired my approach to governance had returned to dust, yet their principles continued to shape how I ruled the empire. I realized that the most powerful legacy isn't what you build, it's what you inspire others to become. I started paying attention to the ripple effects of my actions in ways I had never considered. When I showed patience with a frustrated administrator, I wasn't just solving an immediate problem. I was modeling behavior he might carry forward in his own leadership. When I treated captured enemies with dignity, I wasn't just following moral principles, I was demonstrating to my soldiers how strength and mercy could coexist. When I wrote honest thoughts in my private journal, I wasn't just processing my own experience, I was creating a record that might help future leaders navigate similar challenges. This perspective made every interaction feel more significant. A conversation with a young senator wasn't just about the immediate policy discussion, it was an opportunity to influence how he might approach leadership throughout his career. A decision about resource allocation wasn't just about current needs, it was about establishing precedents that would guide future administrations. A moment of personal integrity wasn't just about my own character. It was about demonstrating what was possible when principle guided action. I began to see my role as emperor less like ownership and more like stewardship. I wasn't building Marcus Aurelius's empire, he was caring for Rome's empire during my brief time as its guardian. The institutions I strengthened, the laws I improved, the people I developed, all of this would serve the empire long after my name was forgotten. This understanding created a strange liberation from ego and a deeper connection to purpose. The most profound legacy work involved the principles I tried to embody rather than the projects I completed. Every time I chose virtue over I was contributing to the sum total of goodness in the world. Every time I responded to hostility with calm strength, I was adding to the reservoir of wisdom that future leaders might draw upon. Every time I treated someone with dignity, regardless of their status, I was strengthening the foundation of justice that civilization depends upon. I realized that legacy isn't something you create at the end of your life, something you build with every choice you make. Each day, through your actions and decisions, you're either contributing to the forces that elevate humanity or adding to the forces that diminish it. When viewed from this perspective, every moment becomes an opportunity for contribution that extends far beyond your own existence. The most enduring contributions, I discovered, are often the most invisible ones. The child who grows up more confident because you treated them with respect. The subordinate who becomes a better leader because you modeled integrity. The stranger who passes on kindness because you showed them compassion when they needed it. Most of these ripples extend infinitely outward, creating changes you'll never know about, but that make the world genuinely better. This understanding made my approaching death less frightening and more meaningful. While my body would return to dust, the love I had expressed, the principles I had lived by, and the positive changes I had helped create would continue flowing forward through time, touching lives I would never know in ways I could never predict. As I write these words in what I know will be my final campaign, I want to share with you the practical system I have developed for living with urgent purpose in the face of mortality. These are not abstract philosophical concepts, but battle-tested strategies that have transformed how I approach each precious day I have remaining. The foundation of urgent living is what I call the morning declaration. Each day begins with a simple acknowledgement. I may not see another sunset. This day is not guaranteed. How will I honor the gift of consciousness while I have it? This isn't morbid obsessing, it's practical clarity that cuts through the fog of routine. An habit to reveal what truly deserves your attention. From this morning declaration flows a practice I've refined over years of imperial responsibility, the daily priority audit. Before engaging with the flood of demands that every day brings, I ask 3 questions. First, if I had only 1 week to live, would this activity make my final week more meaningful? Second, will this action serve something greater than my personal comfort or convenience? Third, am I doing this from love and wisdom, or from fear and ego? These questions eliminate an enormous amount of wasted effort. Meetings that exist only to make people feel important disappear from your calendar. Projects that serve ego rather than purpose lose their appeal. Conflicts based on pride rather than principle resolve themselves. The clarity that comes from mortality awareness acts like a filter that removes the trivial and highlights the essential. I have learned to treat each relationship as if it might be my last interaction with that person. This doesn't create anxiety, creates presence. When speaking with my wife, I listen as if these might be the final words we share. When advising a young leader, I speak as if this might be my only chance to pass on important wisdom. When resolving conflicts, I address them as if tomorrow might be too late for reconciliation. The practice extends to how I approach work and creativity. Every letter I write as if it might be my final communication. Every decision I make as if it might be my last chance to influence that area of life. Every moment of teaching or mentoring, I approach as if this might be my only opportunity to share what I've learned. This urgency doesn't create pressure, creates focus and intentionality that makes everything more meaningful. I have developed what I call the evening gratitude practice. Before sleep, I review the day and identify 3 specific moments for which I am grateful, not general blessings, but particular experiences that made this day unique and unrepeatable. The way light fell across my desk while writing, a moment of genuine laughter with a friend, the satisfying feeling of completing important work. This practice ensures that no day passes without conscious appreciation for its gifts. But perhaps the most important practice is what I call legacy living. Before making any significant decision, I ask, how will this choice look from my deathbed? Will I be proud of how I used my time and energy? Does this action align with the person I want to be remembered as? This perspective eliminates regret. By ensuring that each choice is made with full awareness of its place in the larger story of your life. The key to sustainable, urgent living is understanding that this approach actually reduces anxiety rather than increasing it. When you're living with full awareness of mortality, you're no longer haunted by the vague sense that you're wasting your life. You're no longer paralyzed by endless options because your criteria for decision-making become crystal clear. You're no longer dominated by other people's expectations because you're guided by deeper principles. Living with Stoic urgency means approaching each day as both a complete lifetime and a chapter in a larger story. You live fully in the present while building something that will outlast your presence. You hold everything lightly while caring deeply about what you choose to do with your time. This is how an emperor learns to live, and how any person can learn to die well, by embracing the urgency that comes from understanding life's preciousness and using that urgency to create meaning, express love, and serve something greater than survival itself. My friends, as I prepare to lay down the purple cloak for the final time, I want to leave you with the most important truth I have discovered. Death is not the opposite of life. It's the force that gives life its urgency, its preciousness, and its meaning. Everything I have shared with you springs from this single insight, and everything you do with this wisdom depends on how deeply you allow this truth to transform your daily existence. I have lived as both philosopher and emperor, have faced death on battlefields and in plague-stricken cities, have felt the weight of ruling millions while confronting my own mortality. Through all of these experiences, one lesson has emerged with absolute clarity. The awareness of death is the greatest teacher you will ever have, and the urgency it creates is the greatest gift you can give to your remaining days. When you truly understand that your time is limited, that this day will never come again, that the people you love are temporary gifts in your life, when this understanding moves from your mind into your bones, everything changes. You stop postponing important conversations. You stop waiting for perfect moments to express love. You stop assuming there will always be time later to pursue what matters most. The Stoic way of living with death's shadow is not about becoming morbid or anxious. It is about becoming intensely alive, deeply grateful, and completely present. It is about using the reality of mortality as fuel for meaning rather than fear. It is about letting the knowledge of life's brevity inspire you to live with a fullness and intentionality that transforms both your own experience and the lives of everyone around you. I have shown you how to build an inner citadel that remains. unshakable regardless of external circumstances. I have shared how to focus your desires on what truly matters when time is scarce. I have taught you to see obstacles as pathways and to find gratitude in impermanence. But now you must take these principles and make them your own, adapting them to your circumstances, your challenges, your opportunities. The torch I am passing to you is not just knowledge, it is a way of being in the world that honors both the fragility and the magnificence of human existence. You have been given consciousness for a brief moment in cosmic time. You have been granted the ability to love, to choose, to create meaning, to serve something greater than yourself. These gifts come with the responsibility to use them fully. While you have them, do not waste another day waiting for life to begin. Do not postpone another important conversation. Do not delay another expression of love. Do not put off another step toward becoming who you are meant to be. Death is already on its way. Let that reality inspire urgency rather than fear, gratitude rather than despair, action rather than paralysis. Live as if you might die tomorrow, because you might. Love as if this might be your last chance to express what is in your heart, because it might be. Work as if this might be your final opportunity to contribute something meaningful, because it could be. Choose virtue as if this might be your last chance to build character, because there are no guarantees. The empire I have served will outlast my body. The principles I have lived by will outlast my breath. The love I have expressed will outlast my heartbeat. This is what it means to live with death as your advisor, to create ripples that extend far beyond the splash of your own existence. Take up this torch, carry this fire forward. Let the awareness of mortality illuminate every choice you make, every relationship you cherish, every moment you are privileged to experience. This is my final gift to you, the understanding that death makes life not meaningless, but infinitely meaningful. The emperor dies, but the wisdom lives. Use it well.